going to record. Fabulous. All right. Great. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which, all the lands on which we are meeting today. For myself, I'd like to recognise that I'm hosting this from the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here today. Thanks to everyone for attending today. My name is Amy Crosland. I'm from the ASTN. I'll be moderating today's masterclass on AI and the business of sport. We've got a fabulous panel that we'll be speaking to with in a moment, but before that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Martin Schlegel, the chair of ASTN, and he's going to give us a brief introduction into our session. So Martin, thanks so much. I'll hand over to you.
Yes, thanks, Amy, and welcome everyone. And as Amy was indicating, I'd like to share a couple of thoughts from our side, because this is in fact the second masterclass that we've themed around artificial intelligence and its application in sport. Last year, for those of you who remember, we had a very interesting discussion about the use of AI in human performance. But this time we'd like to look at the business of sport. But before we get into that, let me acknowledge some of the programs that are making this masterclass possible. So we're delivering this obviously today under support not only from the Victorian state government under our Centre of Excellence, but also under the government of Western Australia, Departments of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation with their Future Industries Extend Fund. And for those of you who are not familiar with the ASTN, obviously this type of knowledge sharing masterclasses, the industry research we're doing is part of our knowledge sharing. We also operate a Centre of Excellence, which is effectively an innovation hub where members can collaborate, where we also advocate on behalf of the sector with various across various stakeholder groups. And we're also building the connections to strengthen and grow the sector through our commercialization activities and supports our investment introductions, plus our trade facilitations, like we have recently done with the US excursion. And particularly for our startup companies and the member companies, it's always the idea that as a sports tech business in Australia, you're born global, but we're encouraging you to thrive locally before you then reach into other markets. And for those of you, part of our research work that we have been doing is obviously mapping the sports innovation landscape across Australia. The second edition was just released mid of last year. July this year, we're going to release the third edition. But effectively what the report does, it shows where sports tech activity in Australia is clustered. And there's obviously no surprise that this is around the major centres, Brisbane, Sydney, obviously in Canberra, but in Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth. And we're really trying to bring all of those stakeholders together into a national network, a peer-to-peer network that shares their learnings. As part of the work, we've catalogued as of mid last year was 750 some companies that we identify as sports tech, and we categorize them by market application and technology stack. And for those of you who are not familiar with the definition of sports tech, so there is the definition by market application, so professional sports, elite sports, the business of sport and entertainment, and obviously mass participation and active living. But what's really interesting is what are the technologies that the companies and providers are using to build their products and services? And we're obviously focusing today on one of the hot topics in the information communication technologies being artificial intelligence. And just to set the scene there, in the business of sport, when you think about live sports events, it has now evolved that around broadcasting, live streaming, data analysis, and the predictive markets, these technologies start to play a very significant role. And you can see some of these applications here in terms of infrastructure, computer visioning, content generation, but also the deployment of algorithms to help us understand what's all in that market. These are just some of the examples in the business of sport, and obviously our panel of experts will really start to unpack that in a much better way than I can do in these couple of minutes. So I just wanted to set the scene for us that we're talking about the business of sport today, and which is obviously distinctly different from the high performance, which we touched on last time. And with that, I'm really looking forward, and thank you, James, Guy, and Elise, for joining us this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to that discussion. And back to you, Amy. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. All right, cool. Let's jump into our panel. And I am going to leave some time at the end, hopefully, for some questions from our attendees today. So if you do have questions, use the Q&A box at the bottom. Type your questions into there, and then I'll make sure I'm monitoring that along with my colleague Hayley, and we will come to that at the end. Okay, cool. So we have, as I said, fabulous panel here today. And instead of introducing via reading bios for you, I'm just going to throw to each of them individually to start with, give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, a bit of a background, their current role, and just set the scene for our discussions today. So James, I'm going to start with you. So James Doyle, the CEO and founder of iReal. Can you just give us a bit of an introduction first to yourself? And then I'm keen for you to tell us and kick things off by telling us a bit about generative AI. What is it?
Great. Thanks, Amy. Handle it off to me first, huh? Very good. Thank you. So yeah, as Amy said, thank you so much, the ASTN. I'm the CEO and founder of iReal. Really looking forward to connecting with as many of you as I can in this session today, both through the Q&A and afterwards as well. So again, thanks to the ASTN. But CEO and founder of iReal, my background comes from professional sport. So as a few of you have heard in the call today, started off as a soccer player. I wasn't very good, so unfortunately didn't end up making it to the level of which I had dreamed. Ended up playing for West United in the A-League for a little bit, but then from there got involved in technology, in not in sport but in education. And as some of you may know, the similarities between the world of business and the world of sport collide quite often. So through scaling and starting an education technology company over the last 3-4 years, I left that company going back about a year and a half ago. It was my first entree into technology, into startup, into scale up. And I got the same passion and fulfillment that I got out of running a business, starting a business and scaling it as what I did playing football. And I never knew that I could get that from anything else, but knew that I wanted to combine sport and business in a more real sense, and combine my two passions. So saw a massive opportunity in generative AI, going back now probably about a year and a bit ago when I started iReal. That opportunity was in how do we actually find enduring value within generative AI? How do we actually find a use case and kind of get through the hype? So iReal's mission is to be the leading provider for generative AI in sport. And the way in which we do that is by training generative AI models specifically on sport data. So it's for a specific sports use case to unlock value in sport through generative AI. So that's a bit about iReal, a bit about my background. What is generative AI is the second part of that question. AI has been around for a long time. So AI, there's nothing new about artificial intelligence. I think the actual phrase was originally coined in the 1950s. Generative AI being a subsection of that, the word I like to try and use, even though we're far away from it yet, is to a point of some form of human intelligence. The reason why that is generative AI is great at being trained off of old data sets and creating something that's new. So whether that's new content, new vision, new response, whether it be in text, you already use some form of ChatGPT, I'm sure, as some form of your personal assistant. So the idea that it can be trained off of old data sets and generate, part of it being generative, that's where I like to use, or I guess draw some similarities between human-like intelligence or human-like forms of AI. Because as we interact, everything we come up with is new or it's novel, and that's similar with generative AI. So it's a fantastic time to be involved in this space because it's really at the point of application. Now, how do we use it? How do we utilize it? So that's a little bit of a spiel about generative AI and about me. So thanks for that, Amy.
No problem. Thanks, James. That's a great way to kick things off and a good scene setting. So, Guy, I'm going to go to you next. Guy is the head of Asia Pacific for WSC Sports, but I'll get you to tell us a little bit about yourself and then also speak a little bit about the use of AI in the content space. James just touched on the applications of AI. So how that's becoming an important technology to leverage the personalization of content would be really interesting.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Sydney. My name is Guy Pord from WSC, and I manage our business across the wider Asia Pacific region. So we're working with a lot of companies here on the ground in Australia and all the way up through North Asia and Southeast Asia as well, who are using our technology. And I guess it's a good prelude into what does that mean when you think about AI and content creation. There might be many of you that haven't heard of WSC Sports as a company, but I'd probably say to best explain where this technology is being used. If you picked up your phone in the past few days or you logged into a website or your OTT channel and you caught up on some sports highlights, right? A highlight of your favorite game, maybe there was a goal, a try, a wicket, a tackle that you missed when your game was played on the past few days, it's very, very likely that that video was actually put together via our technology. So we run a machine learning platform and we're using AI that allows owners of sports rights to automatically create and curate and then distribute video highlights to your phone or the device that you're watching those highlights on. And what was a very, very manual process in terms of using editors, we've now been able to bring in technology and allow us to change the way that. It's interesting, James mentions talking about generative AI, which has had a lot of headlights in the past sort of 6 months and getting a lot of attention about, how that's changing many industries. We launched automation and AI for sports highlights around 10 years ago at WSC. So that's when some of the first leagues around the world started using the technology. And really, when you think about it from what it allows you to do as a content creator, the technology is working at a couple of levels. It's helping to identify moments in a live sporting event. Again, that moment could be anything, a goal, a try, a tackle, etc. It's able to identify, index, and find those automatically. And then the second phase of that is allowing us to package up those videos into highlights and make it interesting for you as the consumer or your fans out in the market. So that could be packaging up into long form videos with graphics, different formats, different aspect ratios, and delivering really everywhere that you're watching it, whether it's in an Instagram reel, an app, a YouTube video on your website. So I think that is, a quick explanation of what we're doing in the space of AI and content creation. And, we'll cover a few of the topics, I think, later today of where that's allowing you to innovate as an owner of sports content.
Fabulous. Thanks, Guy. That's super interesting. I'll come to Elisa next. So Elisa Koch is the head of data and analytics at AFL. So again, get you to introduce yourself, and then it'll be interesting to get a view, I guess, from inside a sporting league and one of Australia's largest on how AI, how the AFL is using AI and across the business, particularly probably in that fan acquisition and retention, which I know Guy touched on a little bit as well. So, Elisa.
Thanks, Amy, and great to see you again.
Yes.
Thrilled to be joining you, Guy and James, and looking forward to a great conversation. So just quickly, a little bit about myself. So as Amy mentioned, I head up data and analytics at the AFL, and my team is charged with providing end-to-end data capability for AFL, internal teams within the AFL, but also all 18 clubs as well. When the data and analytics capability was started back in 2019, when I started, actually it was all about probably the non-sexy part of data and analytics, which is how do we automate a lot of the manual reporting that gets done across the industry. And again, I say the unsexy part because you would hope that at this point of kind of where we are, business decision makers would have the KPIs and the measurement they need to run their respective businesses. What I found coming into the world of sport, and I've always been in data and analytics across 20, 25 years of my career, but in different industries. This is my first foray into sport, was that it is an industry with a lot of data, but a lot of that data lives in many different places, and there aren't automated pipelines to access that data. So that was step one for me, is how do I aggregate all the different industry data sources that make up the 360 view of the fan, but also equally on the on-field performance side of things as well. So fast forward now, we're at a point where we do have all of that data centralized, and almost comes at a perfect time when everyone is now talking about AI, because you cannot have AI without a data strategy in place. And I think that's, from my personal opinion, where the conversation gets missed is, yes, there's so many exciting, cool use cases of AI, and we need to talk about that and explore that. But if you don't have high quality data in your organization to power that AI, it's not possible. So I'm thrilled that AFL, we've been on that journey. We're at that journey now where we can actually talk about AI and how do we unleash it. Amy, specifically about your question regarding how we've been able to leverage it on the fan member club membership side of things. Again, nothing that hasn't been done before, but essentially just looking at customer analytics, primarily from the world of retail and FMCG, which is where a majority of my experience is in, and brought that to the world of sport. So now for all 18 clubs, we're able to predict a member's likelihood to churn based on their behavioral data. And on the flip side, we're also able to help clubs understand who are their prospects that are most likely to convert to membership. It's leveraging machine learning approaches, again, that have existed in many different industries, but just bringing that systematically to our world of AFL has been a game changer.
That's awesome. That's super interesting about, we think just sports, but when we sort of start to think about it in terms of other industries that can come into it. I mean, you just mentioned FMCG. I wouldn't have thought that to start with, but that's really cool. Okay, thanks so much, Elisa. Great, thanks for the introduction. So I'm going to sort of get a bit more of an idea of the state of play where we are for AI and the business of sports. So James, I'm going to throw back to you. What do you see as the current state of play for the use of AI and generative AI in the business of sports?
Yeah, well, it's a great follow-up question from Elisa, right? You're exactly right. I mean, you can't have strong AI without strong data. So that's 100%. But I'll come at this question probably more from a generative AI perspective, again, being kind of a new form of AI. So if you think about it, in the early days of generative AI, there was a lot of investment into the hardware. So big companies like your NVIDIAs building out the hardware and the capacity, the compute power to be actually able to handle these models. Then you've got your cloud providers, right? And then you've got your AWS or your Microsoft, whoever it is, Google, Gemini. We've all heard of the kind of arms race that's going on for generative AI models. So that's kind of the second phase, is the cloud, which then gave us the opportunity to access as a public open source models, right? So as I said before, ChatGPT, which I'm sure we'd be all using in our day-to-day life, or some of us would be. If you haven't, I would recommend it. Or your DALL-E, these different kind of text to vision type of Sora is another platform as well. So if you look at those open source models, right from the start of, you go back to I call it the chips, then the cloud, and then we got the chat GPT as an example of that. The final part of where we're at now, especially if we have, and the biggest part is, are we working with the right data partners, especially for our product, being that specific use case of sport, the generative AI product for sport, are we working with the right data partners, data sources? Because then it's actually just about finding that enduring value and the specific use case of what this can unlock. So we're at a really exciting kind of tipping point now, where I think we, as in the sports industry, can start to ask ourselves, how do we actually apply this technology? Because it's at a stage now where we can look to apply it, and it will actually end up being a reflection of us. I'm a strong believer in the product itself. Is sure, we can train it on as good as models or as good as data. It's what we ask it, it's how we train it, and it's how we use it. That's where we're at. So I think it's a really, if you look at the state of play right now, we're at an application point. And to answer your question in a short form, that's where we're at.
That's awesome. That's good to know. And that actually, yeah, that's really interesting. So Elise, I'm going to come back to you because, you know, I mean, there's probably sort of a bit that James touched on in terms of like the use cases. So are you able to elaborate on ways in maybe the AFL has been bringing AI into their business operations? You know, what use cases have you been working on? And how has this been used to sort of boost or enhance the operational process? So what are the applications, as James said, and how's that been used and what are the benefits of that? You know, and I mean, we could go into how AI has been seen as a bit of a threat. Sometimes it's going to take out the jobs or whatever of people, but I don't think that's true. So how has it been more enhanced, and how does that really bring more to an organization in your sort of role that you're in now?
Yeah, and I think at the AFL, it's no different to certainly within the conversations that I've had from, you know, data leaders within other industries, is that we are still very early in our journey. And there are so many ideas about potential use cases, but nothing that has been kind of tested and proven. For me specifically within the world of data and analytics and how we can use data to empower decision making, I've been looking at it kind of from two different angles. One side is how I can leverage AI to drive more adoption of data and insight, right? So traditionally, most executives or people within the business would ingest insight or understand based on, you know, dashboards, for example. But some people may want to leverage just natural language to be able to interact with data. You know, for example, what were, you know, the last 10 games with the highest attendances in Sydney? You know, that is easily accessible via dashboard for someone like me who's a data person. But if I'm an executive team member at the AFL, maybe I just want to be able to ask questions. So that's one area that we're exploring in terms of how we can drive adoption of insights. On the other side of things, where I'm really encouraging my data engineering team to explore is within the productivity space, specifically in Code Assist. So a lot of different tools out there in terms of how engineers can be enhanced leveraging AI. And that's really where I'm encouraging my team to start to explore. So to answer your question, there are many conversations happening about use cases for AI. Again, not yet proven, but I think a real appetite within the AFL to test and learn.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And I think, yeah, you've really hit the nail on the head with the productivity aspect, I think is the bit that we need to focus on rather than the threat of it, you know, taking over jobs. If it eases up, so if it's better for productivity, then us humans can go and do more meaningful work and have more time to do more stuff. So I think that's fabulous. And yeah, saving time for executives to just be able to ask a question rather than sift through a dashboard, I think that's invaluable for them as well. Cool, that's excellent. So Guy, I'm going to throw to you now because we've been talking about, you know, we've got the local sort of insider info from Elisa on how AFL's been interacting with AI. So I'd like to sort of understand from an international perspective, because as you touched on before, you head up the APAC region, and I know WSC Sports is international, so you probably see things that are going on outside of Australia as well. So I'm keen to sort of see and hear from you on what have you seen elsewhere? Is Australia sort of slow to respond? Are we keeping up, or is there areas that we need to step up, or is there some more exciting things that are going on elsewhere that we could step into?
Sure. In terms of answering the question, thanks, Amy. I'll try and narrow it a little bit to, I guess, the lanes that we work in, which is around content creation. Because if you're asking AI in general, then that becomes a big question. But in terms of when you look at how technology is being used, and particularly AI in content creation and automation, I guess to touch on as well, to follow up on something Elisa said and you mentioned, this is about supercharging growth, right? It's not about replacement. And you think about the experts that we have in content curation out in the market. You've got fantastic producers, editors, content creators at all of, let's say, the major Australian media companies and leagues. And what technology is enabling them to do is perhaps take away some of the grunt work of what they were just repetitive editing work and allowing them to automate it and then do new things and growth. And this will sort of, I think, parlay into what's happening internationally. But, we have clients that turn around and say, great, we starting to use automation and it freed up 90% of our editors' time. So the basic videos that they would create about a weekend recap, they were done by lunchtime on Monday. And it was about replacing them. It said, what were they doing now? They spent the rest of the week making behind-the-scenes documentary. They were following a play around or doing some really highly curated, high touch point editing and videography work at a team training that afternoon that allowed all this other new video content to be created for that league that was never possible before because the resourcing just wasn't there. So I think that's a really good example of just technology where AI is allowing growth. In terms of what we're seeing in Australia against the rest of the world, not only in Asia Pac, but wider across the world, I don't think from a content creation perspective, we are falling behind at all. Yes, we might not have the eyeballs when you look at viewership numbers online compared to bigger markets. Yes, they may be smaller, but in terms of the type of content offering, the platforms, the UI and experience, and I'm really talking about video here, Australia's second to none. And you go around the world and you look at the way that video is being delivered, whether it's owned and operated websites or apps, or whether it's the OTT stations, the opportunities in terms of, personalization opportunities, scale, choice of video content that you get as a consumer here in Australia is right up there with what we're seeing around the world. So I think this market is well keeping pace of the largest sort of sports bodies and media companies globally.
Awesome. That's good. I'm just going to say that's promising to hear. And I think, that's good to hear that we're keeping up. And I'm going to stay with you for a follow-up question around the content creation, because obviously as fans we have an insatiable appetite for content, and we're very particularly impatient, so there's that real-time aspect that's really important. And then you've also talked about the personalization aspect as well, which is becoming more and more important. So could you elaborate a bit on how you're using AI in both of those areas, both for sort of the real time, and then also that I'm getting the content that me as my particular fan would be able to view and be interested in?
Sure. So to open up sort of the back end of what AI is allowing us to do with video from a practical sense. Number one, it's allowing us to create content very quickly. So you alluded to speed, right? When a game ends, people don't want to have to wait 2 hours to log into whatever channel they're on to watch a recap. We can generally now with automation send out a game highlight at the end of a match, finishing within 2-3 minutes of the match ending. Suddenly that video is available on your website or app or YouTube to watch. So speed of delivery is really quick. Then you've got the personalization angle, right? So what do you actually want to watch? And delivering a different story for a different viewer. So you take a typical match, let's say it's a footy match, Lisa, look at AFL Grand Final last year. And, what type of game recap do you want to watch from Brisbane v Collingwood? Do you want to watch a recap in 3 minutes, in 10 minutes, in 20 minutes? Depending on your level of fandom, your interest in the game, how much time you have, we may as well give you as a fan 3 different options of the game highlights. we might say to you, hey, do you just want to watch a recap of your favorite moment? Let's just consume all the goals in the game. Or maybe you wanted to see what the Dacos brothers were doing for Collingwood in that game in a player video. All of those pieces of content are now created at once, delivered within a couple of minutes of the game. And the user can decide, what do I want to watch? What am I interested in? And what's been really interesting, when we work with clients and we're really starting to scale up the personalization offering, there's no cannibalization. When you're offering different options of consuming post-match vision, when we introduce the third option, it doesn't mean the other two go down. We're seeing viewership grow. So that shows that the demand's out there. And I think, so that's at a basic level of personalization. I think the next level is then bringing a layer of innovation to how the video is delivered. So we're all used to, clicking on a thumbnail and watching a big widescreen 16:9 long form video. What we're doing now with technology is delivering that differently. If you're sitting on the bus on the way to work, most people are flicking or scrolling their phones. So why not package this video content in a vertical format? Why not package it as a story or a reel that's letting the consumer skip forwards or backwards and consume exactly like they're doing on their social feeds? So I think the technology and the automation, that wouldn't have been possible via manual workflow. And now we're seeing things happen really quickly, different levels of stories, and even a new layer of innovation, or how it's presented to the final fan at the end of the day, is really unique to what was available a couple of years ago.
Awesome. Thanks, Guy. That's excellent. I'm going to go back to both James and Elisa, because you both touched on it earlier around needing centralized, high quality data. So I'm going to sort of question around that, I guess the challenge of that, both from how the centralization of data, as Elisa mentioned, often in silos, but then also the quality of data. So there's challenges often around, if we're going to get insights from things, we need to make sure that the data set is whole, I guess. So I'd sort of just like to throw to you a general question about how do we make sure that we are capturing the right data and are recognizing if there are any gaps? Like how would we go about that?
Do you want to go first, Elisa?
Either.
Sure. So data quality is a never-ending battle. You never win it. So you just need to suit up and just get ready for the battle. The great news is working in data now versus working in data 20 years ago is completely different. And data teams and data professionals now have tools at their disposal to be able to fight the battle a bit more effectively. At the AFL, we've invested in a data technology stack that we're incredibly confident in, and is agile enough for us to be able to deal with the myriad of data sources that feed this industry. And more often than not, the data quality issues that we run into is because we're working with legacy systems that have not yet caught up with the advances in data technology. So I don't want to pretend that I have the answer or the solution. It's a battle, and you got to get ready to fight the battle. But luckily, we have help now. There's technology tools in place to help us with that.
Great. So I might take it from a slightly different angle, as our company's focused more on the data processing rather than the data collection. So our first job in regards to actually utilizing the generative AI product is making the data applicable to the realm in which generative AI is, right? So making a generative AI model, whether it be in, let's say, a text example, allowing the data to be understood by that model. That's our first job. So if the quality is there, then therefore that makes our first part of the job a lot easier, right? So to give you a practical example of that, we're currently working with a very large data set of horse racing data around the world, right? And we originally began with one data company, and we began with two, and then a second one, and kind of built the product in the same stream, the same line at the same time, and realized we could take this product to market, the one that had the better data quality from the original process, because we could process that a hell of a lot quicker and a lot better, and take that to market quicker. So that is from our angle. The data processing element is essential. And then it's actually as well is if you use the example of the 360 fan, Elise was touching on that before, it's another example of how our product can be used, is the actual insights that we can get from processing that data without actually going live with the product. But our initial process of, okay, this is one element of the fan, this is another element of the fan, this is the third element of the fan. Normally it would take a data analyst or a data scientist, whatever it may be, time, energy, effort, resources to be able to gain an insight into what that next step is for the fan, whether it's to measure churn, whether it's to get a 360 view of them, whatever it might be. That first process that we do is understanding the fan from a 360 degree and being able to understand all different angles and the correlation that exists between those 5 or 6 angles, whether they like this on their social media post, whether they interact with, an app during the game, the AFL app, whether they work with, or they buy a beer during the game, whatever it might be. So it's understanding the correlation between that data for then us to be able to implement our, whether it be digital content creation or whatever it might be, through the product. So that's more our element of that. And we've definitely seen that working with the best quality data allows our job to be a hell of a lot easier, and the processing to then actually scale the product. So that's it from my angle, Amy.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think
you go. Yeah, I can see you.
Just to add in, there's a really interesting part. I think when you look at data ingest that we're seeing in sport when it comes to generative AI, and that starting to get into the question of access and ownership. And when you're building a generative AI product, let's say it is an automated image creation tool, and let's run on the theme here of the AFL. Sports and the values of sports are being about protective of the IP of that sport. So to be able to build a tool that allows you to generate images of AFL players or venues or logos at the moment is quite open, but I think we'll start to see that change significantly, because there's a lot of inherent value for the AFL and any other league to protect the training of these models on their IP. So I think we'll start to see maybe the depth of products that's available for sport really start to narrow, because things won't be available to have access to that training models as they do at the moment for more sort of open source day-to-day things that are just easily consumable out there in the market.
And the other thing as well, you touched on that, Guy, just then, is massive thing we see, and part of the problem we try and solve with a sport product itself is the hallucination and the drift. So open source models tend to actually, if they don't know something, make it up or falsify the response, especially in text as well. So part of our job as well is responsible AI. It's a massive pillar of responsible generative AI, what we are looking to implement throughout not only our product, but hopefully then throughout the industry as well, is how do we responsibly use AI as being or generative AI as being a main core pillar, so that those hallucinations, drifts, and also the IP queries are dealt with. And you're right, it's an ongoing battle, but definitely the first step is making sure that hallucination, that drift of falsifying information, that's something we can control at least. So yeah, you're definitely right.
I can see you nodding, Elisa. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points, Guy, on your point. I think just, the IP piece of it, it's we see other industries already diving into that, right? So a lot of media platforms are starting to license their data to different companies who build these LLMs. So I absolutely agree that I think sport is just a bit step behind in terms of how we do protect our IP and how they feed into these models. And James, to your point regarding hallucination and drift, that is where I tread very carefully within my world of AI use cases, because if, for example, in the exec adoption use case, if I have an exec asking a question to try to get the insights that they want, I need to make sure that what comes out is absolutely correct. So I think I think data quality is one part of it, but I think it's also about the model building and the training itself. And I just don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah. Just a reminder, please, we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end. And I haven't seen any questions come through yet, but I know you must have them out there. So there's plenty of stuff that we've been talking about. So please drop them into the Q&A. That's a quick reminder. So I'm going to talk about, so one of the things that I heard was there was a discussion before about, you know, AI. We've been talking about this for a long time. There was something referenced that some particular was around for 10 years ago. And then we're only sort of maybe in the last very recent history is like everybody's talking about AI, and now we're sort of getting to it. So question for everyone on the panel, 10 years from now, not just asking you to be a crystal ball sort of reader or anything like that, but what do you want to see the use of AI? Like, what would be either a cool thing or just a useful thing, or even, you know, you can live your dreams. Tell us what you want to see 10 years from now, what you either think or you hope. Go, James. You look ready.
I gave off the wrong face then.
Okay, sorry, no.
No, that's fine. No, to be honest with you, as I kind of briefly touched on before, I see us as being an application, and Elisa touched on that. You know, if I use a baby analogy, we're only just getting strength in our neck to be able to find some use cases, right? So like that's the first thing. So if that's where we're at right now, the reason why I think that that's an important thing for 10 years from now is that it's going to be a reflection of us, because it's the way in which we build, it's the way in which we apply, and it's the way in which we interact that are going to develop and continuously train these models. So if you look at ChatGPT as an example, right? The way in which it's getting stronger and the way in which the model is continuously going to grow is the amount of people that are going to use it. So it gets compoundingly better and better and better and stronger the more that people use it and interact with it. And again, how strong it gets or the direction it takes is going to be a reflection of the myriad of different things we ask it throughout our lifetimes or throughout the next few years or whatever it might be. So I really think that if I had a crystal ball, that generative AI and AI would be used, I'll stick to my domain as generative AI would be used in a way to super boost current products and services that are out there to make our jobs and our lives easier, and to give back time to people not only in the sports industry, even though that's what our talking point is today. So to super boost those current products and services that are already existing, giving back time, and for it to be a positive reflection overall of us and what we ask it and the way in which we apply it.
I'll go next and answer the question. For me, 10 years from now, and this may sound a bit philosophical, theoretical, but ultimately, my hope is that AI will make humans better. Not make humans worse, but better. And that's everything from how it enhances and supplements us in our personal lives, but also in our professional lives as well. Within the professional world, I don't think the business needs to know whether AI was leveraged or not leveraged. It's just going to be another tool in the toolkit, and it will help us get to decisions quicker, more effectively, and productively at the end of the day. So I know there's a lot of talk about the applications of AI specifically, but for me, it's one tool in the very big toolkit about how we can use it to make humans make decisions better.
Right, thanks, Elisa.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Lisa, to carry on what you're saying, I think it should add a level of simplicity and fun along the way of what we're doing, right? To your initial point, Amy, 10 years ago, you know, AI was being used, but it was really complicated, right? It was a lot of coding, a lot of development, and the only people that knew about it was software engineers. Now it's being transformed into interfaces like ChatGPT, where you can type in simple questions like, hey, plan me a 48-hour itinerary in a city that I'm visiting, and you can get easy answers out of. So as Elisa said, to make things better in our lives, simpler, have a bit of fun along the way in the area of sports that we're in, and, you know, in my space of content and consumption as a fan, I want to be able to access things really easily when I want to access it with specific choices, what language, what commentators I want to hear, what type of filters, you know, just really easy ways to consume the sports that I love at that time. We're getting better and better about it, but I think it'll be amazing what's around in 10 years' time.
Awesome. I do have some questions rolling in. I know Martin's got one to kick off with, and then I've got a couple more that I'll get to as well. So,
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And the quality of data was already a theme that all of the panelists talked about. And my question is, do we actually need a common data platform that we share to improve the quality that we have? Is that too far-fetched?
I mean, I'll speak from the perspective of the AFL. When I started in the role and, had to make a decision and business case in terms of what data platform we would ultimately migrate to from our legacy platform. Martin, just what you mentioned there in terms of a platform that would enable collaboration and sharing in a safe and secure, compliant way was critical. So, for example, the platform that we have in place, which is Snowflake, we have our central AFL instance, but we also have clubs that have their own instance of Snowflake as well. So what that allows us to do is seamless sharing of data both ways in what I know is going to be a safe and secure way. So increasingly, I think data collaboration needs to be a very big part of every business's decision in terms of the technologies that they're going to invest in, especially with the world of third-party cookies going away and first-party data really being quite critical within the fan space. How you can collaborate with your partners on data is really important.
Thank you. There's Rich, I also saw you had a question that really lended into that as well, sharing of public data, and you were asking about is there any IP breaches, content generation? So hopefully that sort of answered some of that question for you as well. I'm going to go to the next question as well. JB from Daily Motion, how big is the real-time data for AFL live video content? Yep. Sorry, I'm trying to read this. How big is the real-time data for AFL live video content editors, data analysts versus delayed async data? And then there's a follow-up question. Are AI ML models enabling the generation passing of that real-time data already? Maybe Guy also has a take on this as well. So.
I can jump in to answer that. I think I'll try and sort of, there are a couple of different questions here to look at. In terms of, I guess, the size and speed and the use of data that's been created as a live footy match is on, yes, speed is important, but it might not be as important for different situations. So speed in the space of wagering is critically important, right? Because you're getting an indication of something that happened that might be influencing a live odd model for a cricket match that is on for the next ball. So getting that, the analysis of that data, the interpretation, the adjustment of odds, in that interesting of wagering, speed is critical. I think when it comes to content creation, we're not down to counting milliseconds or seconds yet. We're at a level in almost real time that if you take a sporting event and an action happens on the field, we can have a piece of content out in, let's say, a minute after the event is happening in real time, where we've found the moment, clipped it up, turned it into video, sent it somewhere. That could be JB answering your question to a Facebook page, for example. And, I think that's pretty quick in terms of the demand of the consumer for what they're looking at. So when you're talking about speed and what's available now, it already is quite fast what's happening. When you're getting fast from minutes to seconds to milliseconds, that will ultimately depend on the end commercial use case here.
And the other one that's obvious, which is just to add on to that, if that's okay, Amy, is it's not just in the business of sport, but it's also in the performance of sport as well, right? So if there's a real need for in the world of performance of sport to get informed decision making. That data is essential in that, and therefore the mechanisms to collect that can then be commercialized as well, in whether it be wagering, whether it be broadcast, whatever else, but definitely to get the edge competitively.
Excellent. Great. All right, it's last chance anyone to throw out any additional questions, so make sure you pop them into the chat here as well. Otherwise, I'm going to throw around for sort of any last comments from our panelists, unless I see something else pop up. So I think, James, you said it right at the start. We need to get through the hype of AI. So I think we've done a really good job so far. We've heard some actual realistic use cases, how it's used. We've learned that, it doesn't have to be a threat to our jobs or our business or the way that we do things. So I hope that for everyone listening today, you've been able to also get through the hype, because obviously, everywhere we go at the moment, we're hearing AI this and AI that, but to actually have a real valuable conversation and to learn about the practical applications has been fantastic. So I going to take this opportunity to thank so much for the panelists for being able to give us that knowledge, and I've learned so much myself. So I will just make sure I've got one question I think that's come through. Great question. So Karthik has asked, how can the local grassroots sports clubs adopt AI? So obviously, being a smaller group, and obviously then there's also budget constraints and resource constraints. How could a local grassroots club adopt AI? Does anyone want to take that one?
It's a good question. I think on a data perspective, and Lisa, you've probably got better views on this, but there would have to be open tools out there on simple database analytics, right? So if you're a grassroots club, you've got people registering in all different formats, right? Emails and WhatsApp groups and forms online. And if you want simple ways to analyze who's in your grassroots club and who's joining and who's leaving and where they're coming from, I'm sure that there are some, database tools that we've worked with that are open, free, easy to use to get a measure of that on a club, which was previously a very tough exercise to go through and work out who are the kids playing sport, whether that be netball or cricket or footy every week.
Yeah, right. Sorry, James.
Yeah, so for us, in a practical example, we're working with some research on some sport analytics companies. So the democratization of sports data, as you were just saying before, guys, not just the elite teams that are accessing data, right? And Lisa would be able to comment on this quite well. And it's not just the AFL that might be collecting data, it's VFL all the way down to some grassroots sometimes. I mean, you're looking at companies that like your Vios, Huddles, Pixelot, that are making it easier to be able to capture data by a mum and dad standing up a camera on the side of the pitch. So when you have the data collection, then you can start to adopt some AI at a grassroots level. So simple things like being able to, some of the research we're doing is how can someone automate their own highlights at an age of 12 to be able to send out to a scout overseas. Or how can they ask for improvements on their performance to a virtual coaching assistant to be able to give them a training regime throughout the week. So as long as we're able to capture some basic metrics, often through some pretty easy to use camera or hardware now, we can start to, again, apply AI through a bit more of a democratization of technology. Yeah, so good question.
Yeah, great question. I just noted we have a question. Rich was asking a question, how long, about the length of time it takes to train? James, you touched on training and training the data and training these models. Is there sort of a time frame? How long does it take to train our systems in order to give decent insights, I guess, is what the question is there.
So for us, we worked with a big data analytics company on an NBA use case. We went back 7 years worth of data. For a horse racing use case, we went back 10 years worth of data. So it is a lot, and hence why the quality is definitely needed. So yeah, that's. I mean, from a training perspective, it all depends on how much quality, how quickly we can do the processing. So there's all of those variables in there. But in terms of how long we go back data wise, it's generally that 5 to 10 year period.
Yep. Okay. Question here from Nikita. We had a question about the 10 years time, but I'm interested to understand where the highest value opportunities or the most exciting applications may lie in the next 2 years in your respective fields. So highest value or most exciting, and that can be, you know, subjective.
For me, kind of two areas. One is absolute. Again, as I mentioned, it's a perpetual battle. So to the extent that we can leverage smart AI to help us detect anomalies and actually suggest ways to fix those anomalies in a scalable way, I think that's an incredible use of AI. Second, for me, I guess specifically within sport, is actually on the data collection side of things. Like I know at the AFL, for AFL specifically, there's you know, given the free-flowing nature of the game, there's a lot of manual data collection. You know, people literally coding every single play and move. So that's where I'm excited. I know a lot of other sport are doing it well and probably far more advanced, but I would say in the manual data collection side of things, I'm excited for the use of AI.
I think from our angle in terms of what's, you know, we're pretty close to seeing out in the market is a next layer of personalization of video and content delivery, and doing it from a perspective where you don't even need to tell or to nominate what you want to watch, but the content is being served to you. We know what you want to see. We're serving you that content at a very individual level at the time, at the space that you want to see it, without any inputs from you, just by learning on your behaviors.
Yep.
For me, I mean, if I just go to a use case that is I think there's three levels: changing the way in which we understand, interact, and then engage with the game. I think that across all of them, there's some really exciting things, whether it's getting closer to the field, as in getting closer to replaying moments, whether that be through the stuff that you guys are doing, Guy and WSC, with different camera angles, through that content on automation of, do you want to see the two brothers, Nick Dacos? Do you want to see 5-10 minute highlights? Like, what is it exactly that you want to see? That personalization of understanding and interacting with the game. I also think that the ability to be able to, and I touched on it in my last example, democratize sports so that everyone gets access to better information about the game, better information about their own personal highlights, about their own personal statistics at a grassroots level, I think in the next 2 years is going to come on a lot. So I'm really excited about that from a foundational level.
Great. I have one more question that's come through, and then we can wrap things up. So would love to hear, and it sort of tags into the last question, would love to hear the panel's top prediction for how AI will shape the consumption of sports content, given that we might get to a state of personalization that would allow consumers to create their own content with the advent of models like Sora. So any thoughts on that? That might be...
Yeah, for me speaking, not as someone who works at the AFL, but as a new and casual fan to the sport of AFL, I would love to see AI leveraged in terms of personalization of how it can attract casual fans like me. Mm-hmm. So the clips and the plays and the players that I want to see is probably very different to an avid footy fan. So the AI being able to understand what interests me, and it may not be, you know, necessarily the really technical footy stuff, and maybe something more casual and lighthearted, to be able to tailor content for more new and casual fans.
I love that, Elisa, because that still means that you're a fan, but then it's a different way to engage with all types of fans. There is not one type of fan. So that's really good. That's really excellent. Yep.
Yeah, I think that probably the question there is where the access comes from. And I think that deep level of personalization offered by the league is fantastic. Will it be there in terms of, you know, users creating their own content? I'm looking at the question here with models like Sora. I go back to my point earlier. Will sports release that type of information to a platform like Sora? That's the IP, right? The value of sports around the world to fund the ecosystem is around protecting that IP. So I don't think it will be completely open to all of these places, but that doesn't mean that the owners of those rights, the leagues and the broadcasters, can't create something and deliver to the fans out there. And I think there'll be some fantastic experiences for, you know, whether you're the most hardcore or recently introduced fan to these leagues.
Yeah. Touching on probably what you both spoke about just there is, and there's been a pilot going on with the NBA at the moment called I think it's called Ask NBA. When we were speaking about it with the CTO of the NBA last week at Sport Next. To go towards what you were saying before, Elisa, is how do we personalize it, whether you're an avid fan or whether you're just an everyday consumer? The ability to be able to actually ask and interrogate the data in natural text. So for us, it's a product we're working on at the moment where you can literally just go, hey, give me these stats over this amount of games, or hey, give me this video, give me this highlight of X, Y, or Z. And again, we have to work alongside rights holders, work alongside leagues and associations and clubs, but giving unrivaled access to whatever it is on demand, whatever stats you're asking for, whatever videos you're asking for, whatever content you're asking for, and that be an actual conversation. That's something that excites me as well.
Amazing. Great way to finish up. So thank you again to our panelists. I have really thoroughly enjoyed this. This has been such a great discussion, and we'll continue to keep having discussions like this. So make sure you follow along with the ASTN. We will be putting a recording up of this for anyone that's missed out, but absolutely, we would love, we've loved this conversation and hope to continue, and maybe we'll come back in a couple of years' time and see where those predictions got to. So thank you so much, everyone, and appreciate your time. And yeah, we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And thanks for that. Thanks for that, Amy. Great moderator. Cheers. Thank you.